Hi everyone, Oliver Kember here, and I hope you've been enjoying the behind the scenes for my short film Last Christmas so far. We've had 2 videos from on set, 1 video looking at the sound design process. Today we're going to be looking at the grade, and then there's a final video coming up on how we scored the film. So if you haven't seen the film yet, now is a really great time to do so that what we're looking at today doesn't reveal anything in the story. So give it a watch, the link's below, and then come back here and I'll open up the Davinci Resolve session for you. So the film was graded by myself and the wonderful DOP Aaron Rogers, and we did it right here on my iMac using Davinci Resolve. Why did we grade it here and not get it done by a colorist? We could have gone either way. It's just that I thought it would be fun to have a go, to learn some things, try some things, and just have a play around. And given that I directed the film and Aaron shot it, we both sort of knew what we wanted the final result to be, so it just seemed like a fun thing for us to do. So this is Davinci Resolve, and once you get to know it, it's great, but I appreciate it can be a bit intimidating going in. I want to just take a look at this clip which I've pulled up, which is of the wonderful Poppy Polivnik, who played Polly in the film, and I thought this shot would be a good example to quickly talk about workflow. So if we look at the top right here, I have group pre-clip, there's clip, and then there is group post-clip. And I want to talk about what those 3 different categories are because it establishes the foundations of how we graded this film really nice and efficiently. There's a 4th little dot there that's timeline, and there's no node on that, which means that we didn't affect the timeline as a whole. You can also view these just by clicking here, and it's the same as viewing these dots. You'll quickly realize in Resolve that there's always 10 ways to do the same thing, which can be good and bad. So just looking at this shot first, well, that's sort of the final look that we got. How did we get there? Well, what I'm going to first do is just disable everything and then talk you through what each node is doing, and you will see how this shot came to life. So the first thing that I did was group the shots. What does that mean? Well, it means on the timeline here at the bottom, you'll see all of the movie. And what's interesting is I've just disabled all of the nodes that relate to the clip that's selected. But as you'll see, some of the clips still have a look on them. And then here again, some of the clips don't. Well, why is that? Well, basically, this little link icon, this green link that's everywhere, means that all of these clips are linked together. How do you do that? Well, you just click a clip, you right click it, you go add into a new group, give the group a name, and then you click OK. So what that means then is this shot is in a group which is called Room Night, and by having this shot in a group, it means that you can affect all the clips in a group at the same time, which is really handy, especially if you've shot in one room with one sort of general lighting setup and you want to apply a LUT to all of those clips, but not to everything on your timeline, i.e. everything in the film. And if you've watched the film, which I hope you have, you'll notice that at the end, there's some daytime stuff, and then there's another scene in the chimney, and we didn't want to put the same LUT on everything. But there's enough shots here that are similar that we do want to affect them all at the same time. You know, if you want to add more than one clip, you can just kind of select them like that, right click, and then go, you know, assign to group. These are already assigned to this Room Night group, which I made for all these shots. So let's go back to that shot of the very sassy looking Polly. So the first thing I like to do is basically to flick through a bunch of LUTs and see what grabs the eye. And I know that's controversial because LUTs are a fairly controversial way to grade. And I think if I was grading the film now, I might not necessarily use the LUT in the final look, whereas I'd just use it as a starting point for inspiration. However, in this film, the LUT is part of the final look. It didn't seem to break the image too much, which is something you do need to be aware of when using LUTs. Some of them can be fairly destructive. Some of them are smoother than others. Some of them will add sort of blocking and banding and stuff. So you do need to be careful when using LUTs, but they are a brilliant starting point for flicking through a series of, Instagram filters, if you will. And it sort of guides your eye as to, oh, that's what we were trying to achieve, or do you know what, that's a really nice way to go with the look that I haven't thought about. So thankfully in Resolve there's now, and there wasn't until fairly recently, there's now a lovely LUT viewer in the top left here. So if you click that, you get all of the different possible LUTs that you might want to use on the film. If you just click them, it shows you a preview of how your shot will look with that LUT on top. We shot the film in 4:3 on the Alexa Mini using anamorphic lenses. I've got these sort of LUTs that are designed to bring the Alexa Log C image to a Rec 709 color space, which basically just means adding the color and the contrast back into the image. So for example, if I just click that, you'll see a preview of it, that one, and I'll sort of just go through and I'm waiting for something to jump out and to go, yeah, that's kind of what we were trying to do. So these are just the LUTs that I have, and I've got them from all over the shop and bought lots over the years, and you start to collect these things. But I'm just going to close up that panel, and then you'll see that we're in group post clip. That's where we put the LUT. And why did we do it post clip? Well, group pre-clip is all of the shots in that group before you do any specific clip level adjustment. And that is that one. And then clip is all of your specific clip level adjustments. We'll come back to that in a second. And then group post clip is all of the adjustments that you want to do to that group after you've done specific clip level adjustments. And I like to put the LUT at the end of the food chain, as it were, as sort of the final piece of the puzzle. And I'll show you what you do with the other two sections in a bit. And then obviously the fourth one we've talked about, which is timeline, which we're not using because it would affect everything and do some real damage. What's cool is that once I enable it by hitting Apple D, all of the clips in the timeline below are popping that grade on, and that's just sort of proving how affecting the group post clip really does affect all of them. Obviously it was too dark, so we made some adjustments here in the curves bit by just sort of bumping that up, and if I hit Apple D again, there you'll see it comes to life. And now that's sort of roughly the colors and the brightness and the contrast that we wanted for the film. What's right about this image? Well, you've got that sense of blue in the background. Obviously the wall is blue behind her, and then you've got that warmth on her skin. But what myself and Aaron, the DP, wanted to do was really bring out that lovely separation between character and background. So you'll see here, if I enable these two, that's the actual final look that we liked. If you hover over the clip, you'll see what you've actually adjusted on that node. Now's a good time to point out the difference between this and this. This single arrow at the top simply means that this node is coming after the one before. And this one means that they have a relationship, that these two nodes have a relationship. So this is an outside node, and this is just a regular node. What does that mean? It means that it affects anything outside of the key that you give to this node. If you right click on a node, there's always a few options that you can add a node, and they are serial, serial before, parallel, layer, and outside. There's a few really handy shortcuts in Resolve, and I just want to take a second to quickly show you what they are. So if you want to add a node afterwards, it's Alt S. If you want to add a node before, it's Shift S. And if you want to add an outside node, which we've talked about, then it's Alt Y. And you'll see the same sort of line comes up telling you that these two have a relationship. I'm just going to delete these entirely by creating a compound node and then going delete node. And that's the only way you can delete groups of nodes in Resolve. So what do these two clip level nodes do? Well, if I make this bigger, you can see here roughly the shape of Polly. If I click the magic wand here, which is related to this little pipette icon over here, you'll see that Polly's skin is selected. We go down to the pipette here, and these controls affect the key essentially. Now, to get a key, you just click on the thing that you want. There you go, and it selected her skin, and then all of these controls affect, the luminance, and you'll see that it's now picking different parts of Polly's face, and then the saturation here, So that looks good. That looks like just her skin. And then what's a really good tip is this blur radius. That will make very bad keys. So this is a really, really handy tool, and it gets just the skin and the hair, which is what you want. Why did we do it? Well, we did it to create an outside node, and really what the magic is here is this guy. If I hit Apple D and turn him off, you'll see that the background just flicks between sort of being slightly sandy yellow and that lovely, rich, clean blue. Because this is an outside node, it's only affecting everything that isn't her face. So it means that Polly's face stays nice and sort of warm and orangey and tungsten lit, and it just cools the background off and really, I think, makes the image suddenly pop and gives that sense of separation between character and background that enhances that kind of 3D effect. And we did that for every single shot in the film. So the answer is, it is a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. Can you do that on a global level? Maybe, but we decided to do it per clip, and it took a lot of work, but it was worth it. So let's just go to the shot next to it. We've got 3 nodes. Let's have a look at what they're doing. The first one is, and let's put on the magic wand, just selecting Steve's face. And if I turn that wand off and I hit Apple D on that node, you'll see that it's simply just a slash that helps brighten up his face. And I think that makes a massive amount of difference. Where is that taking place? Well, it's taking place here, in that's the tracker. And if I scrub through here, you'll see that it actually moves with his face, which is amazing. And you can affect that tracker here. Here are the keyframes for it if you want it to move around and stuff. But essentially, what's awesome in Resolve is that you just hit play and it starts the tracking, and you can see that latching onto Steve's face. It's just this amazing GIF that you don't have to manually track that in. It makes life so much easier. And then here to the right, it's the same kind of idea with separating the skin tones from the background. So Apple D to disable those. Look at that. You can just see the blue really popping through. And in fact, the moonlight looks bluer. The walls are less warm. And so I think your eye just goes straight to the warmest part of the frame. So maybe now we talk about what group pre-clip is. In order to do that, I'm just going to re-enable these, make sure that the LUT is on. So depending on what kind of computer you're looking at this on, you will or won't be able to see what difference this is making. So let me just make this bigger. If I hit Apple D, there you go. That's a completely noise-free image. What is that? Well, let's hit Open Effects. We have reduce noise here. This is Neat Video's denoiser plugin, which is absolutely phenomenal. At the time that I graded this film, I didn't have the full version of Davinci Resolve. I just did the whole movie on the free version, which is pretty amazing. But now I have the full version, and I am yet to experiment with whether Neat Video is better than Resolve's built-in noise reduction, which only comes with the paid version. And I will let you know at some point when I work out which one is better. I think it's really important to denoise at the part of the timeline before all of your grades, because you want it to be as if the image came in super clean and then you did all of your grading work on top of an image that just happened to have no noise. If you start denoising after the LUTs and after all your adjustments, it can really cause havoc with your grades, and it will start trying to denoise the color that you've added to the shots and stuff like that. So I think the cleanest way to do it is before the clips, and instead of just putting it at the beginning of the chain here, for example, I could have gone Shift S and then added the denoiser here. Instead of doing that, I basically profiled one shot in this room, and then did it on the group pre-clip, which means it affects everything in that group, and it's just a much quicker and more efficient way than manually copying and pasting it onto every single clip. So obviously that's really, really too clean. So the final step was actually to add some grain. So that's Film Convert, which is what I eventually used, but I added some special sauce, and that's why I did it in Premiere, where I did the final exports of the film with the audio and everything like that. I will talk you through that at the very end, and I'll explain what that special sauce is. So stay tuned. So let's close that down. Let's disable the grain. Let's disable the group pre-clip. Let's bring clips back up so that we've got everything here. So that's everything in the film up to, say, this clip, for example, of Santa/Steve looking slightly manic, played by the wonderful Dan Ings. I had a grade where I could get away with this key being applied to all of the clips in a group. So I just put these close-ups all into one group, and you can see that when I click on one of them, the green link icon here pops up. Alt-D these, and you'll see all of the group post-clip nodes coming back on. What I love about the final result is the richness of the reds, the warm backlight, the cool sort of moonlight effect on his face, and that really nice sense of color separation. So I'm going to flick these all off, and then we'll flick them back on one by one. This is the LUT, which comes in quite dark, but was our starting point. These are the adjustments as per before. And I thought that the blue moonlight effect was just a touch too much on his face. So these last two nodes, which I'll flick on, you'll see just put the normal skin tone back in, and it's subtle, but it makes a big difference. I think you can see the highlights here on the bridge of his forehead and nose were just a bit too blue and shiny, so we just keyed him and then we warmed those up. We just affected tint, saturation, and other bits and bobs down here that brought the skin tone back to where we wanted it. Let's have a look at the shot of Polly. So what's going on here? Well, brightening her face. We did that with the tracker again, and then there's adjustment here in the gain channel, and we just brightened her face. Not too much, but it just helps guide the eye. Turning this one back on, this is an outside node that again affects the blue, so it brings that lovely warm, cool color separation back in. So this is a square-shaped tracker that just slightly boosts the levels on the left side of the frame to match the right side a bit better, and we did that this time with just nudging the bottom of the curve there. Clicking this node on, you'll see that no color or contrast or saturation changes, but the background changes. What I wanted to do, and you'll see this here, is to cut out Polly and defocus the sofa behind her. We were shooting this with a set of these brilliant vintage anamorphic lenses called Toyo Ikes, and the set had a 32, a 50, a 100, and a 203mm lens. This shot really was perfect for like a 75mm over the shoulder, but because we only had a 50 and a 100, I had to make the call on which one to use, so I chose wider, and then actually we sort of slightly cropped in post to get the kind of frame that we wanted, which was a bit of a workaround. Because of that, it meant that we'd shot on this wider lens with less depth of field, but then once we've cropped in, it feels like there should be more depth of field, and there's a really cool way that you can add that. So basically, I've put a shape round Polly here, as you can see. I'll turn the magic wand off, and let's go into the open effects. What is this? This is a blur, and this is built into Resolve. You'll see that I didn't use the width and the height. I only used the height. Why did I do that? Well, I wanted to only blur using the vertical axis. Obviously that looks insane. Somewhere around here at 19 amounts of blur vertically, it felt like the way an anamorphic lens blurs the background, which is that it sort of has these ovals that then make the defocused image sort of appear as if it's a bit more stretched, but only vertically. So to recreate that effect, I've only blurred the height of the image, which is a really cool way, I think, of giving that sense of anamorphic lens bokeh in post to slightly help give the sense that this was shot on a longer lens and not just cropped from a wider one. So that's a cool little trick there. Let's move on. In the wide shot, because it's a wider shot, there's lots more going in, but just what a beautiful, rich image I think that is to look at. That's there, Dan turning around in frustration. And actually, interestingly, on this lens, look how gnarly the sofa is. It looks like it's sliding off the earth, and I don't know why, but that's probably anamorphic lenses for you. So I want to move at pace. I'm just going to quickly disable this, and you'll start to see now the sort of fine level of polishing that goes into wider shots to get them where you want them to be. So turning everything off, let's just turn things on one by one. This is just the LUT, which will be on the group post-clip level. And then specific to the clip, we have darkened it. We have brightened roughly the area where Dan and Polly are. and you can see the shape there that just sort of pops them a little bit brighter again. These linking bars we now know means that there's an outside node happening, and what is that doing? It's making everything that's not within this guy blue, as we've been doing before. What do we have here? We have a little vignette that's brightening the left side of the frame. That might look a bit bright, but that's because the next node is a sort of overall vignette which darkens everything. And obviously without the one before in it, I probably just thought that's actually now too dark. It looks like we've lost information. So let's just brighten that before it gets to this overall vignette, which again just helps guide the eye to who we're looking at in the middle of the frame. Then the last one is just a vignette on Dan, who felt slightly darker in relationship to Polly, and because he's sort of the focus of the shot, deciding whether he should make a run for it or not, I wanted to have him slightly brighter and make sure that your eye goes to him as he turns around. So again, I can just disable that, hit Alt-D and have a final look at what all of those lovely nodes are doing. Yellow and bright in the wrong places and all sorts of stuff. And now I think the eye goes to Dan as he turns around and decides whether to make a run for it. We're now in the chimney, so if you haven't seen the film yet, big spoiler, Santa ends up in the chimney, as he should. The first thing that I want to say is that we shot this in such a hurry at the end of the day that we didn't have time to get a diopter in front of the lens, which meant that the image was ever so slightly out of focus on the background on the bricks and not on Dan's eyes, our actor's eyes. So that had to be fixed. All of the work is being done on a clip level, and generally that means that the more work is being done on a clip level, the more tricky that particular shot is, because it requires lots of individual adjustments and not just a sort of overall look. At the end of the chain, you'll see here that there's actually no LUT on this, and this was just a manual grade I did. Any of the LUTs I tried just crunched the image way too much. With everything on, color-wise, we've got the overall look here at the end of the food chain, and then these two are just changing the look of the highlights on the Santa costume in order to keep the sort of sense of blue moonlight as we had in all of our other shots in the film in the main living room. I didn't want the color to be pure white, so I brought it down a little bit and slightly blued it off. These two are doing two things together. One of them is affecting the brightness of Dan's face, bringing it up. And the other one is an outside node, and we know that because of this joined line. And it's actually blurring the background. Once I'd keyed his face, it occurred to me that I could use that key to make a key that was affecting everything that wasn't that in order to blur the bricks again. And I think you'll agree that it just really subtly brings the focus back to his eyes as if they are in focus. And it stops you looking straight at the really sharp brick texture behind him and to the sides and noticing that they're actually more in focus than our actor's eyes, which obviously isn't the intended result. And again, I've used only the height blur so that we get the same sensation of the anamorphic sort of vertical bokeh smearing the out of focus areas. And now we're on to the last setup, and this is the daytime stuff. And you'll see here just how much is going on with all of these different nodes. Why, I'm not sure, but it was just particularly hard to get the look we wanted for these daytime shots. At one point I've used the LUT, another point I've just graded by eye, and now we're actually using the Film Convert plugin in order to set the colors and contrast for the look of this shot. Why? I don't know. It just seemed to work better. But I guess the point here that's interesting is that you don't always have to use the same sort of pipeline. 3 different ways of achieving the same result, which is turning that log footage into Rec 709. So that's everything off. That's a log image as it comes in. That's the look that I went for, and you'll see now that the look is sort of in the middle of the node graph there. This before was obviously boosting the brightness, and then there's some sort of specific color saturation stuff I'm doing. So I'm affecting the hue versus saturation of the blue channel, which is probably the sofa. This here doesn't immediately seem obvious, but it's affecting the saturation of the greens and of the reds. This one, again, is brightness. And I'm not sure why I did brightness with 2 different things, but I'm sort of making it up as I go along. So those 2 are doing brightness. this is affecting the sort of overall color temperature. Obviously felt a tiny bit warm overall. And this one, for example, is, again, really, really subtle, just bringing across the finish line. And you can see that it's affecting just the warmth here with the presence, so that, again, your eye goes straight to it. And flicking it off and on, it actually feels quite obvious. But again, in context, you don't realize that it's popped on. I guess that felt fine, but it didn't feel as joyous as this area could to me. And I really wanted the gold of the presents and everything to stick out. So there you go. Just a nice, big, warm window that really brings out that orange glow that makes the presents feel really rich and magical. Wide shots for me are more like theatre, where you don't get to guide the eye as much with a close-up. You have to set the stage and then people can look wherever they want to look, and you don't really get to control that as much as you do when you've got depth of field and a close-up lens. So there's lots going on in this shot. I think it's beautiful production design by Aurelie, our production designer, with the tree and the hanging stockings and the presents and the lamps, and the location is stunning and the sofa is stunning and all of the details on the table. So I really want to make sure that each of those looks as good as it can if your eye happens to be looking at those. So that's why it takes so many different adjustments. That's just the LUT. And now I've selected all of the adjustments and you can see what a difference it makes. I mean, that's just not quite good enough. And so all of these other things bring out the elements that we wanted. We'll end with the close-up just to say that's what the image was like when it came in. And then these are all of the local adjustments that give it the final look that we were after. So it's too warm, so we cool it off, and it's too dark and stuff, so we brighten it up. Simple things, but necessary things, and all part of the fun. So the last step before exporting for Premiere here was just to enable the denoiser for this group and for all the other groups. So the image has no sense of texture whatsoever. The last step is to go into Premiere, where I did the final export of the film, and that's where I added the grain and that special secret sauce that I'll talk you through in a second. So let's open up Premiere now. We're now in Premiere, and please ignore the fact that so much of this project is offline. It's been a while since I opened this project file up, and I've moved everything all over the place, but I've just relinked this little section here for us to have a look at. This is the final look, including the grain. So obviously we did the grading in Resolve, and here we've done the grain. Now this is the clip. Above it is essentially a transparency layer where I've put the grain on, and above that is the special sauce, and I'll talk you through that in a second. So I went for something very simple. I slapped Film Convert on and I put the grain to about 43%, which was a sort of nice level to my eye. I chose this Super 16mm grain because it was just slightly more crunchy than the 35mm stuff. I brought all of the camera settings, so the film color and the film curve and the softness, crucially, down to 0. Above that, however, is where it gets really interesting. So I'm going to quickly open this Film Scratches timeline. Now, I bought and downloaded this stuff called Rocket Stock Emulsion. Seems to be permanently on sale at $79. I'll show you the folder, which comes up here, and you'll see that there's a few 8mm grains, a few 16mm grains, and then a few more options for 35mm grain. And then there's a few clips at the bottom which are really interesting, and they're just pure sort of light leaks and scratches and dirt and stuff like that. And I thought that that could be a really interesting thing to try. So I'll play that now so that you can see what this looks like. And for me, this just had that really nice sort of nostalgic, you're in an old cinema watching a movie being projected. There are 3 problems. 1, exposure jumps all over the place. And 2, the hairs and scratches are really over the top. And 3, it's only 9 seconds and 15 frames long. So I had to solve all 3 of those problems. The first you'll notice is that I essentially just cut it up by eye, and I chopped out anything where the exposure jumped too wildly. Now that introduced a second problem, which is that it's now even shorter than it was. So to solve that, I took this chunk, which I deemed to be worthy in terms of a normal amount of exposure levels, and you'll see here that I just copied it and I added a horizontal flip, and you'll see the pattern repeat again. And on this third group, I added a vertical flip. It says here on the website extendable duration, and isn't everything extendable if you loop it? So I wasn't quite so sure about the length of footage that they supply. It would have been nice to have a lot longer, and also it would have been great if they'd leveled the exposure like I had to manually do. But hey ho, I've done that, and now I have a nice clean grain file, which I then exported as a MOV so that I can use it on other projects and outside of Premiere, and I'm now cutting these days in Resolve. So now I have this MOV which I can drop into anything, and we'll jump over to the final export page, and you'll see if I play it here, if you're looking very, very closely, you'll see those bits of flicker and dust and debris appear. But the third problem which we haven't solved is the fact that it's really over the top. So we solved the exposure, we've looped it, flipped it, flopped it, exported it, re-imported it as a master file, copied and pasted it all the way along as a top layer, and the final step is to adjust the opacity to where I deem it to be fit for purpose and not calling attention to itself. So just playing that through, you'll see that at 10% it just gives it a really nice nostalgic sense of an old piece of celluloid being projected through in a dusty old movie theatre where they've run it over and over again. It's kind of worn the film out and it's attracted loads of dust and flickers and stuff. I think it's a really cool extra bit of special sauce on top of the film convert grain. Thanks so much for tuning in and for sticking with me on this one. It's been a long one, but I hope you've enjoyed it and learned a couple of things along the way. I'll be back again soon with the last video in the series, which wraps up the making of Last Christmas, and that's on the score. So if you're into film music soundtracks, I think you'll enjoy that one. So please do come back for that. If not, I'll see you again soon, and thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.